Hello, hello, hello. This is Peter welcoming you to the live stream. Just making sure that we are live, and we're going to see that on the YouTube channel. Yeah, there we go. Very good. Welcome to the live stream, wherever you are around the world, whatever time zone you're in. Thank you for joining us. And we've got lots to talk about, I guess, haven't we? Because we've got the Belgian Grand Prix this weekend, and it's going to be, sadly, I think, a sprint race. Not exactly my forte, as you know, but nonetheless, it is what it is. So that means, of course, that we'll have one session on Friday, then it'll be qualifying for the sprint race, then we'll have the sprint race on the Saturday, which I think is 15 laps or something, and then qualifying for the Grand Prix, and then the Grand Prix on Sunday. And in the middle of all of that, it looks at the moment from the predictions difficult to be accurate at this stage because weather is so changeable in that part of Belgium and the Ardennes forest that qualifying is going to be on the dry side. In other words, Saturday the sprint race could be dry, but the race on Sunday at the moment, lots of clouds and rain seem to be falling over the graphics there. But anything can happen, as I say, and things can change at the last minute at Spa, as we've seen so many times. And here's a nice picture of this is courtesy of Max Esterton, actually. He has a very nice little pre-race release thing he puts out for the media. He's racing in Formula 2. Hasn't had a great season so far. Let's hope it picks up for him. Seems to be so many issues with engines and different power outputs from the various engines, all supposed to be identical in Formula 2. Yeah, right. Anyway, won't go down that path at the moment, but thanks to Max for that picture. Just reminds us of how much in the Ardennes forest that race is and how changeable it is. But it'll be nice to get back to Spa, won't it? Some great corners there. Eau Rouge, obviously, not so much a corner these days, a little bit of sort of 130R category, but impressive in the wet, impressive on full loads of fuel still. And then at the top of the hill, we've got that very annoying downhill right-hander, understeer City, Arizona, and then down the hill towards Pouhon, very, very quick left-hander. One of my favorite corners in Formula One, actually. Say who am I to say? But one of the places you enjoy watching them through Pouhon. The corner where it's a very quick left-hander, I think it was 86, might have been 80, yeah, around there. Anyway, mid-80s. Nigel in the Williams broke the steering wheel going into that. And it's not that he was holding it massively tight, it was just the G-loading and the way he was loading the car. Anyway, the steering wheel, the outer rim came away from the spoke. Can you imagine that in the middle of Pouhon corner? This is in practice. And even Nigel was pretty spooked by that. Yeah. I think it was a Momo wheel. I may be wrong. We were playing between Momo and Personnel at that time. And then you come up the hill, of course, Blanchiment and the last chicane to the thing. So yeah, it's going to be classic Spa, isn't it, this weekend? All the weather and the Pirelli tyres. Interesting Pirelli lineup of tyres now. Obviously, still the hard, the medium, the soft, and then you've got the intermediate and the extreme wet for the wet. But the hard is much harder than it would normally be relative to the medium and the soft, if you see what I mean. So there's quite a big gap between the hard and the medium. So I think Pirelli are saying this is to make it a more interesting race, to be honest, and sort of, two-stop strategies come into play. Although around Spa there are so many other variables that I'm not sure they need to be playing around too much with compounds, to be honest. But anyway, the hard is pretty hard. That's what we need to go into this weekend thinking about. So on that basis, the one I've been on the road, as some of you may know, 2 trips actually. One was an aborted trip, which was going to be the road trip all the way to Estonia. We got as far as Germany, and I got so sidetracked with so many things going on there. Nürburgring, Porsche Museum, and then we went, I'm just about to show you now, we went to Belgium as well. That by the time I'd looked at the sort of diary and realised that I needed to be back anyway, much sooner than I thought after the Rally of Estonia, that I would then drive back all the way to Spain and then fly back to Estonia. So yeah, I've done a lot of miles, and I probably look a little bit bleary-eyed right now. Apologies for that. But yeah, so what we did, we went to Germany, but I also went diverted, if you like, to Belgium on the basis that it is the Grand Prix coming up. And I've always loved that part of Europe anyway. And Belgium is, for me, synonymous with Spa, synonymous with Zolder, obviously, and then Gilles, Spa is a circuit. I've said before, it's not. I don't clamour to go to Spa as a fan or as even as a journalist, because I find that place quite spooky, and it's because of all the ghosts and the memories in that place. And I just find it quite a difficult race actually to attend. So anyway, that's just me personally. It's not that significant, but I did once, when I was working with Speed TV, stay at Bastogne long before Band of Brothers was made, actually, because I was always fascinated by and super impressed by the role of the, obviously the Americans, and how they withstood that Battle of the Bulge, that last attempt by Hitler to get through the Ardennes forest in 1944, the winter of 44-45. And Bastogne played a real role in that as a town that had to be defended. And so I did go to Bastogne, got to be at least 15 years ago now. I just stayed there, and it's about an hour's drive north up to Spa when you stay there. And I think I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. I was absolutely amazed to see that on the Saturday night of that particular race, that Françoise Hardy, who was the total megastar of Grand Prix, the girl with the blonde hair, just brilliant. And she was a very good singer as well, and we all went out and bought her albums as well after Grand Prix, was actually performing live, singing live in Bastogne on the Saturday night of the Grand Prix. So I went that Friday, I went up to, I made a beeline to Bernie's bus at the track and said, Bernie, can you believe this? Françoise Hardy is in town. We should get her to the race on Sunday, get her to do a parade lap. Everyone would be absolutely amazed to have her there. And what a great thing to have her, the girl from Grand Prix, the movie, at the track. And Bernie sort of said, nah, rubbish, and just walked away, and that was it. So nothing ever happened. So that was that. Just my Françoise Hardy story. And of course I didn't get to see her because I was working at the track that weekend. Anyway, getting back to the point, I went to Bastogne again, just because, and we stayed there. I just wanted to go to Bastogne again, and this is one of the first things I saw when I got there. I thought, yeah, this place really has its heart in the right area of human endeavours, doesn't it? Because there was some sort of classic car show going on whilst we were there. Amazing. I never actually got to see the show, but that we just walked out, Jack and I, we just walked out to find a restaurant, and that was the sight that greeted us. Cobras, GT40s, mega, totally brilliant. And then the next day we went to what is a relatively new museum for the Battle of the Bulge, and it's incredibly well done. This is you go to the museum and have a look at everything, and then you can go out to the Bois Jacques, the Jack Wood, which was one of the scenes of the battle, very near the town of Foy, which did feature in the Band of Brothers, and they've beautifully done. They've just kept the wood as it was, and you can see there. That's two pictures I took of. I'll just do that again, I think, won't I? Fairly quickly. It's just beautifully done. The wood is exactly as it was, and you can look at the foxholes that were dug by Easy Company in their defence of that area. I know this has got nothing to do with Formula One, but it's very impressive. And the sorts of young guys that were doing that and weathering the storm and the winter and the conditions in which they lived are the sorts of guys today who are out there racing, to be honest. And it's always good to remember them, I think. And just to go back to that picture again, you can see obviously that's winter of 44-45, and then you can see the little American flags everywhere where one of these poor guys lost their lives. So yeah, that's not to be depressing, it's just to say that is part of Spa's heritage and history, and I hope that will never be forgotten, because they've done such a good job with that museum. We then, I mentioned, and I've shown, I think, a few pictures on YouTube and also shorts and stuff of the Porsche Museum. The one, and I've still got to say, my favourite car is, I think, the Porsche Carrera 6, 1966, of all time. I just love the simplicity of that car, and I loved the fact that at that time, if you had a reasonable amount of money, not a massive amount, you could go out and buy one and go racing with it. It's just a beautiful car. I love that car, and I didn't show that exact picture, so I just wanted to do that and indulge myself. And then, of course, in the last week, we've been up in Estonia, where I think I was privileged to see the brilliance of Oliver Solberg finally given its reward to win the Rally of Estonia basically from start to finish. He's just given a one-off drive at 2 weeks' notice, I think it was, less than that probably, that he's going to be driving a Rally 1 car. It's just like going from Formula 2 to Formula 1. And just he rang his co-driver Elliot Edmondson, who was in London having dinner with his girlfriend or wife, celebrating their win in the Acropolis Rally, in the Rally 2. Got the phone call from Ollie saying, "Oh, we're going to be driving a Rally 1 car in Estonia," and Elliot says, "Oh, okay, good, all right, we better get started." And so they were going to do new pace notes anyway, and they'd done a few, and they just went out and took it very calmly, got on with it, and won the rally from start to finish. And it's easy to say that, but when you think of the guys that he beat in Toyotas, in the Toyota team, not the least of which was Kalle Rovanperä, former world champion, yeah, and all the other seasoned guys, Elvin Evans, who's leading the championship, or was up until Estonia, Katsuta, Sami Pahari, who got the drive at the end of last year for his success in Rally 2, and they didn't give it to Ollie, because I guess he was a Skoda driver last year. And they gave this full marks to Toyota for giving him this opportunity, because he is just the most amazing talent. And I said, before I went up to Estonia, I said, I'm going up basically because I want to see Ollie Solberg in a Rally 1 car. I just can't wait to see it. He did do some Rally 1 drives with Hyundai a few years ago, but they didn't go very well. I don't think they got the best from him any more than he got the best from himself. But I wanted to go and see it in the Toyota because I just had this gut feeling that he was going to do something very special. And actually ended my video with the picture of Ollie giving the thumbs up after the testing in the Rally 1 car, and I was doing a thumbs up as well because I just wanted to see him, because he's an amazing talent, and he didn't in any way let us down. He was just amazing, and his mum and dad were there. Look at Peter Solberg, also a former world champion, and his mum. He's got much more of his mum's personality, I think. He's very bubbly, Ollie, whereas Peter's a little bit more dour and systematic about things. And they were staying in those motorhomes by the paddock area. The power went down Sunday morning, as they do with motorhomes, and Peter, I think, got much less sleep than Ollie. Ollie was pretty calm and cool about the whole thing. And it was just a great story. And I'm trying to think of equivalents. In terms of what he achieved, it's got to be up there with Max jumping into the Red Bull A car at the Spanish Grand Prix and winning that race. It's got to be comparable to anything Sebastian Vettel did in the early days of his Formula 1 career. And it's somewhere near Lewis and the shock he gave Fernando Alonso in 07, because we're talking about drivers of that stature. And we're also talking about whether or not millions and millions of people watch rallying is irrelevant from my perspective. It is an incredibly difficult sport, and it's very demanding in terms of driver skill and what you can do with the car in very, very difficult conditions, treacherous conditions, shall we say. Ollie, no doubt, has unbelievable talent. You can see it when he drives, and I dare say that, like all these guys, if Max had started rallying when he was 12 years old, he'd be doing what Ogier is doing, and if Ollie had started in single seaters with a full budget, he'd be doing what Max is doing. I suspect he's that good, and so it's very visible in rallying, and it is a great story. How often do you see things like this with a young guy like that, with no real opportunity to do anything unless somebody decides to give him a chance? How often do we see that happen? A, and B, turning it into a win like that. I mean, it's just brilliant, and it was so nice to be there. And somebody was asking me the other day, is it easier to make it in rallying than it is in Formula 1? Well, my answer to that is that if you've got very, very wealthy backing all the way, it's easier to make it into Formula 1. Whether you then win races is another matter, but you can do it. Rallying is a different story because there's not as much money in rallying. It's much more difficult to get money to be spent by third parties. You've got to go out and prove your talent. But the good thing about rallying is that if you do prove your talent, you can then be given opportunities, and what Ollie has done is great proof of that. So yeah, excuse my getting excited about it, but to me, when a young talent is able to achieve what he did, then it's something worth celebrating. I've also got out at the moment, I'm going to get onto all the questions and comments very soon. I've also just posted a 2-part story of Carlos Reutemann's endeavors in 1980, July 1980. So it's about the same time, 45 years on. Doesn't seem like 45 years, but I guess it is. of what Carlos did between the British Grand Prix, finishing third in the British Grand Prix, and the next sporting event he did, which happened to be the Rally of Argentina, round of the World Rally Championship, where he was driving a third factory Fiat 131 Abarth alongside Volterol and Marco Allen, and Attilio Bettiger, actually a fourth car. And he finished third. He finished third on the podium, and he finished third in the British Grand Prix in the Williams. And so he had 2 podium finishes in Formula One and World Rally Championship, WRC, in the space of 11 days. And in the middle of all that, or just before the British Grand Prix, the day before, he won the BMW M1 Pro Car race at Brands Hatch as well. So in some ways it's a tribute to Carlos. I think these 2 parts and how good he actually was as a racing driver and how versatile he was. It's also a reminder, I think, of what can be achieved. It was like Jim Clark winning the Indy 500 and the Formula One World Championship in the same year. You could do those things, and some drivers went out and did them. And in Carlos's case, he had a very understanding team owner, Frank Williams, who said, yeah, just make sure you're at Brands Hatch on the Monday or the Tuesday after the rally to test on the short circuit, which he did. Didn't last long because I think the gearbox went. So I've got a few things from there. I mentioned in the video that quite early on Carlos had sponsorship, or the local Fiat dealer in Santa Fe, Grossi Fiat, helped him with a lot of stuff. And there's an actual car badge off a Grossi Fiat from Santa Fe, Argentina. Not a specific Carlos car, just a Fiat from Santa Fe. But I did manage to buy this model recently. Isn't that wonderful? This is the actual car, well, the model of the actual car, that Carlos took to third place in the Rally Côte d'Azur in 1980. Beautifully done, absolutely superb. Some of the sponsors he had on his overalls in 80 in the Formula One car, like Noel, who made chocolate in Argentina, are on the car as well. So, yeah, really nice. I love those Fiat 131 Abarths. And continuing the 1980 theme, just another artifact. This is one of the pistons from the Cosworth DFV engine fitted to Carlos's Williams FW07 when he won the 1980 Monaco Grand Prix. And in those days, you could get those at the end of the year, and I did, obviously. Quite sure we can keep that sharp. But yeah, it says Monaco 1980 Carlos Reutemann. That's a piston from the DFV, and of course Lolly signed it for me. So that's from 1980 as well. Why don't they do that today? Here's the piston from the Mercedes engine used by Lando Norris at Silverstone. I think they'd sell a few of those, wouldn't they? Oh no, can't do that. Very secret. Yeah, but get a life. They're such nice things to have, aren't they? And we just don't do them anymore. Such a shame. So I think that's all I've got for my pre-show, whatever you want to call it, ramble. And so now, I think with no more ado, let's get on with some questions and comments. The first one is from, inevitably, Sticky Ding Dong. Right. Hi, PW. Have you seen the Formula One movie? No. If so, how many stars out of 5? Well, pass on that one, I'm afraid. John Frankenheimer's 67 masterpiece, Grand Prix, remains the gold standard of motor racing movies, in my opinion, even if, and there's another question, 2-part, I guess, even if, like all of these types of movies, it's glibly melodramatic in how it tells a story about their off-track lives. Really? I mean, I was just talking about Françoise Hardy. Was she glibly melodramatic? I think she was mega dramatic. She was just great to look at, wasn't she? But those immortal lines. Would you like a cigarette? I don't smoke. Would you like a drink? I don't drink. What do you do? Then Frankenheimer cuts to another scene. Anyway, I wonder if there are any moments like that in the new Formula One movie. I've heard that the dialogue's not much, which, as I said before, presumably means that it's absolutely true to life, on the basis that the dialogue isn't much in real Formula One either these days. Oops, shouldn't be saying that. Yeah, I mean, I just don't think it's the same. When you interview all these set-piece interviews in that scrum thing they have, and they've all got to say what they think is the appropriate thing to say, it's slightly different to just chatting to Mario Andretti as we used to in the car park and saying, Mario, what the hell's going on with Colin? And yeah, wow, man, you know. And it'd be a proper conversation. Or Jackie Ickx, or Carlos, or Emerson Fittipaldi, or Niki Lauda, or anybody that you talk to. They always were real conversations. I don't think you do that today, and that's the, you know. So I say, if the movie captures that, then they've done a very good job. Anyway, I haven't seen it. I guess I will at some point. Although it's so nice to be back in Spain. On the great roads here, in the weather, with the family obviously, where we live, just doing things without crowds, and just, it's so nice. I doubt I'm going to travel very much in the next few months, or even go to the cinema if that's where it's on. I don't know. It's probably streamed somewhere, isn't it? Anyway, not to worry about that. Sarosh Soman is another regular. Hello, Sarosh. Hi, Peter. Remember that you were mentioning about Carlos Reutemann saying that he always focuses on looking at the exit of every corner. Can you elaborate, please? Yes. Yeah, that was... I mean, Carlos and I, quite often, I would pick him up from his hotel and drive him to the track at quite a lot of Grand Prix, whether we were overseas or in Europe or wherever. And he'd come out of the lobby in his overalls, carrying a big sort of track pack thing, Gucci, I think it was. And he'd get into the car and I'd drive. And he would start muttering and saying things to himself. And then he would say, stop here, Peter, stop here. And I would stop, and he'd seen a little country road or a dirt track, and he'd get out and he'd just start jogging up and down, just to get the blood circulating. And his thing was he never wanted to get to the track too soon. He didn't want to see all the people. He wanted to just get to the track at the last minute and just get in the car. I like that attitude. I think that's great. You know, he would hate it today, that business of the drivers having to walk through those turnstile things with 35 photographers all clicking their lenses at him. Carlos would find, absolutely for sure, he would find a back route into the paddock to make sure he didn't have to go through that, or he'd just climb over the fence and do a deal with Bernie where he didn't need a pass to get in or something like that. Anyway, getting back to the point, we'd chat a lot about driving, and particularly various corners of the circuit and the lap that we were on that weekend. And quite often, and I would say to him, is it a corner where you're seeing the exit well, Carlos? And he'd say, no, I have no feel for this corner. It's very difficult for me. The car, terrible understeer, very bad. I must speak to De Pasquier about this. Other times he would say, I see the exit long before I turning into the corner. And what he's doing there is he's picturing the corner in his mind as he's going in, and he's totally confident of what the front of the car is going to do. The front is always the key. And because he was an amazing short corner driver getting in very early, it was very critical for him to know exactly what the front was going to do. But providing he knew that, what he meant was I had perfect feel for the correct rotation point long before I get there, which is obviously what Max feels right now in everything he does, providing he's got a reasonable front end. And at that point, you're just seeing the exit of the corner. You're absolutely picturing the car in a straight line already. And that's how you get that perfect judgment. It's not by looking at the point specifically. It's by seeing it in your mind before you even get there. And that's what Carlos was able to do. A lot of drivers, I think, can do that in other ways. I mean, even if you think of somebody like Carlos Sainz, who's the sort of flip side of Carlos Reutemann in the way he drives, and very oversteery, very back-endy driver. Even Carlos Sainz is thinking, I know that little spot I want the left rear to be running to, even before he's gone into the corner. So it's not an unusual thing. It's just that Carlos, because he was as good as Max, in my opinion, in terms of getting into the corner early, short corners, that is when it becomes a much more effective tool to be able to picture everything, because then you are doing the corner, I would say, at perfection. Pretty near as perfection as a human being could ever do it. Whereas with the Carlos Sainz thing, you've always got the issue that he's a little bit wide, he's using a little bit too much road going in, and he is driving with the throttle rather than the brake against the throttle and the steering load. So that was his way of describing whether or not the car felt completely underneath him and he could feel the surface of the road and everything was going on. His way of describing it was to say, I see the exit before I turning into the corner. That's what he used to say. And it's interesting, I was translating that stuff from the rally, And he said, I started to drive into the rope of the corner. And all I was thinking about was the way a rope is coiled like that when it's sitting flat. And that's exactly what he's talking about. That sort of finding exactly the right moment to get in to do the rotation, if you like, the center of the rope, and then getting it out. And even though, as Mirko, his teammate, was saying, a lot of drivers drive on the rear. Carlos immediately started to use a sort of wall-to-roll technique when he got into the 131. Sarosh Soman, changing the subject completely. Hi, Peter. Some history lesson for me. Why did the FIA take the decision to have grooved tyres from 98 to 2008, please? Oh, that was a Max Mosley thing. It was a Max Mosley thing. He was president of the FIA, appointed by Bernie, basically, using a little scene part of the regulations, voting regulations. Well, it had always been there. Nobody had ever really exploited it because it was always sort of the Jean-Marie Balès type election. But with Max, Bernie and Max realized very quickly that all they had to do was get a lot of the countries that nobody's ever heard of in terms of motor racing to vote for Max, because they all have one vote, and to do all that behind the scenes. Obviously a little bit of money was transferred and a few other privileges for those countries, and they got all the votes and Max got in. So basically then that Max was Bernie's guy running the FIA, and then Bernie had complete control of motorsport. So that's what it was. But then when he got in there, Max, to his credit, did, I think, realize that there could be other kudos to be gained if he looked at the area of the industry of road safety and car safety for the everyday motorist. And one of these things that he did was to say, well, in that case, we're going to be relating Formula One more to road car development and safety. So why don't we put the Formula One cars onto treaded tyres? That's what it was. I think it was as simple as that. It wasn't a thing to suit one tyre company rather than another initially, anyway. It was literally, let's make things a bit more difficult for the drivers and the teams, and won't it be good to have these narrow track cars on treaded tyres? Of course, it wasn't good. The cars, in my opinion, the narrow track thing was terrible. That was, in theory, to make it easier to overtake. Didn't work because they were still too big. And then the treaded tyre thing was, speak to Fernando Alonso about it. It was just a nightmare because graining had been in the vernacular of Formula One for quite a while before treaded tyres. But when we got treaded tyres, graining took on a new meaning and a new depth and a new level of calamity, because once the tyres started to grain, it was almost impossible to get them back with the treaded tyres. And it drove everybody to distraction. And some races, one tyre would work, other races it wouldn't. And so they went through it all. And there was very little anybody could do about it because Bernie and Max basically did whatever they wanted. So it went for a long time. But they should have stopped it after a year, in my opinion. But they didn't. And so, that was the period also when Max banned the use of spare cars, which I think was a mistake. And I still think it's a mistake. And cut back a lot on testing as well, which I still think is a mistake. And a lot of other not good things happened. But then again, as I say, credit to Max, he did initiate quite a big safety revolution in Formula One, particularly obviously after Senna's accident in '94. But then he continued that. He didn't allow it to just peter off, and he did a good job in a lot of other areas, particularly cockpit driver safety, survival cells, and also Bernie, coincidentally, possibly, but happy coincidence, seeing that the future, so far as he could perceive Formula One, was to get governments of countries to underwrite the cost of building ridiculous super circuits in the middle of nowhere in order to be on the World Championship calendar. And it worked. And we still have quite a lot of them there. Some of them have faded away. Turkey and Malaysia, two good examples. China is still going. India, Korea, what happened to those tracks? Anyway, again from Sarosh, Peter, what is Helmut Marko's role in Red Bull and how does it differ to what Christian was doing? To me it looks like both of them having overlaps in every aspect except matters related to contracts, etc. I don't think so. I think Helmut worked for Red Bull and basically, and still does work for Red Bull, and basically represents Red Bull's interests at the Grand Prix, whether it be the Red Bull A team, Red Bull B team, or indeed all the Red Bull drivers in Formula 2 and Formula 3. They're all basically part of Helmut Marko's responsibility. Whereas Christian was team principal of one team, the A team, with a little bit of responsibility for the B team. And that had grown over the last 12 months, I think. But now he's gone. So I presume Mekis will have the same thing now, partly because he knows the B team so well anyway. But so far as Helmut Marko goes, he is Red Bull's guy there. So there wasn't a lot of overlap in what they did. It was, you know, if it came down to Christian Horner saying, I think we should get rid of Sergio Perez, Helmut Marko could have said, no, we want to keep him, Red Bull want to keep him, we've got to keep him. And Christian would have said, oh, okay, all right, well, I can work with that. I'll go with that sort of thing. I guess in that sense, Helmut might have had more power, but I don't think it was any more than that. The overlap was about that at its max. Right, I've got the chat box is kind of frozen. I've got a blue arrow, which I'm going to press in the hope that it releases it, and it does. It's seen it working. Okay, good. Aaron Lee. Hi, Peter. What do you think the racing would be like if they created a rendition of Monaco and Nevada, but with massive runoff around the whole track? Well, yeah, obviously, that's something I've been talking about for, I don't know, can I say years now? Yeah, it is years. You know, all this stuff about going to street circuits and how wonderful it is to be in Miami and Vegas and all this stuff. I've always said, you know, to me, the holy grail is to replicate the great circuits of the world, Brands Hatch, Monaco, the Nürburgring, North and South circuits, and other tracks in the middle of places where it can be afforded, like Nevada, and build them there. And Monaco's one, but I think even better would be the Nürburgring. You know, build the Nürburgring exactly as it is, with exactly the same corners and elevations in the middle of the desert. Have lights there, so people can. I mean, it's an industry, and it absolutely would work. There's no doubt in my mind that it would work, because going to the Nürburgring this time and see, I just thought there'd be sort of odd cars going out, and it would be what it used to be, but there wasn't. It was like a lineup of cars, and most of them were GT3, GT4 Porsches, a few hypercars there, one or two ordinary cars, but not many, and there were just people lining up to do very, very fast laps of the Nürburgring, very fast laps of the Nürburgring. And it's just endless. It was absolutely non-stop, 7 days a week. And that's what would happen if they did a rendition of that circuit in somewhere else. And if they made it safe and it had decent runoff area, but had all the elevations and all the corners and the curbs, everything else, it would just be the most amazing thing. And we could hold a German Grand Prix in America, and vice versa, I guess. And we could hold it under lights. You could do a million things. I don't know why they haven't done that, because this is the era in which that should have been done, because this is the money era for Formula One with Liberty there. And to me, that was the obvious thing to do. Brands Hatch as well, you know, great circuit. Fantastic race circuit. Not, I say fantastic because you can't imagine, I'm using it in the true sense of the word, it's a fantasy race circuit because it combines great corners, paddock bends, clearways, with undulations, and it's a relatively short lap, so it's really good for racing too. So, you know, why wouldn't that be recreated somewhere? And we know it's all too tight in terms of the paddock area. You build all that into the new place. Same with Zandvoort. You know, go back to the old Zandvoort. If there's not enough room there, go back to the old track and put it into a place where it actually can fit and work. Middle East. I say Nevada. You can do all this in the Middle East as well. And so, you know, I'm glad you're mentioning that, Aaron, because it's a drum that I've been beating for quite a long time now. And I think they would be just as successful. They'd certainly have much more longevity than a street race, and they'd be just as successful as the Grand Prix in those countries were. I've got to break here, though, and say I did actually spend quite a lot of time going around the South Circuit at the Nürburgring on this occasion, and it's incredibly impressive. The South Circuit, for those that don't know about it, is not the new Grand Prix track, nor is it the old Nordschleife. It's what used to be called the South Circuit, still is, and it's the Südschleife, and it's just basically a loop that goes down the bottom of the circuit, downhill and then uphill. And I'd never realized how quick it was. It's just one series of S-bends and fast sweepers after another, with trees both sides. Now it's trees. Those days I think it was more hedges, and the hedges have kind of grown into trees. You can do virtually the whole lap. And when you think about driving Formula 2 cars around there in 67, 68, and how quick those Formula 2 cars were, how light they were, how quick they were, usually that race, the Alpha-Rennen, was held in April. In 67 it was snowing, and they still raced because they didn't want to let the crowd down. It was ice on the edge of the track. It was snowing, and they still raced these Formula 2 single-seaters. And they all would have been 4th, 5th gear most of the time, round the lap. I mean, just incredible. That, if more than anything, that to me puts Jimmy's accident at Hockenheim in 68 into perspective, because he was actually not doing anything different to something he'd done year in, year out at many circuits, particularly the South Circuit of the Nürburgring. Alessandro Durango. Hi, Peter. Another regular. Hi, Alessandro. I'm going to Spa on Friday and Saturday. My seat is in GP2 grandstand between La Source and Eau Rouge. Wow. What do you suggest to focus on most? Well, A, have a great time. B, I think you'll find the French fries, the chips, the patate, are nicer in Belgium than any other country in the world. You've got to have them with mayonnaise. C, if you get there early enough, try and drive around the old circuit, which you can do. It's a public road, and there's another great chip shop, and the Master Kink, actually. And D, it kind of depends where the grandstand is. La Source, of course, is the tight hairpin, the right-hand hairpin, and then they go barrel down the hill into Eau Rouge. If you're in the middle there, I think your time would be well spent looking left as they're going into Eau Rouge, and you can look at the various degrees of sparkdom coming from the cars. There'll be different ride heights going through there. Who's lifting and who's not? But blink and you miss it because they go through so quickly. If you're further up the hill, the exit of Eau Rouge is pretty good because it's pretty wide and you can get the power on quite early, and the cars usually have quite a lot of angle on them coming out of La Source. So worth looking at that as well. And I think seeing who gets the car straightest soonest will give you a little bit of a feel for how they drive. You know, you'll see guys like Hadjar and Max and probably Charles, well, definitely Charles, coming out more or less straight, and you'll see other guys leaning on the rear more, like Sainz, like Liam Lawson, like Yuki Tsunoda, and you'll see differences there. But you'll enjoy it. And also, I suppose, just remember that, of course, that's where the start and finish used to be for the Belgian Grand Prix. So try and just picture in your mind how many Belgian Grand Prix have been held when that was the start line, that downhill start into Eau Rouge was the first plunge they took, and how many great Grand Prix have been held at Spa starting from that position. And basically where the Formula 2 pits are, and Formula 3 I guess, is, well, Formula 3 take it over, don't they, for a little bit. That's exactly where the Grand Prix pits were. And the podium for the winners of the Belgian Grand Prix was above those pits in those days when they started from the start-finish line. So the famous shots you see of Dan Gurney with the flowers after the 67 race, which he won with the Eagle, or Bruce McLaren there in 68, or Jim Clark, all the races he won, 4 races. They're all taken, that podium was just above the garage area, Formula 2 pit area. So lots to think about, lots to remember, but the chips really are the main thing, I think. Mario Moscow. Hi, Peter. I don't know if you've answered this question before, but I wanted to ask, how do you compare a 3-pedal driver to a 2-pedal driver? Well, a good person to ask that question to would be Rubens Barrichello, who was the last of the 3-pedal drivers in Formula 1. And whilst Michael was racing with 2 pedals, Rubens had 3. And same at Williams. He never, ever wanted to brake with I say 3-pedal. Let's look at it another way. Rubens always right foot braked. He never left foot braked. Of course, he didn't have a foot clutch. So in that sense, the last 3-pedal driver would have been, around what, 92, 93, I would imagine. There were some teams still running foot clutches then. But then they more or less went away from that with the paddle shifts. And so I think it's a question of whether you're asking me to compare a right foot braker with a left foot braker or 3-pedal to 2-pedal is, to me, there's quite a big difference. I mean, Jim Clark in 1967, back end of 67, said to Colin Chapman, I think I can probably do a bit more with the car if I could brake with my left foot periodically when I want to, just to get the car settled or do this or do that. And so Colin actually built a Formula 2 car with 2 brake pedals for Jim Clark for 1968, and it was literally the normal brake pedal, and there was a bar across the bottom, and then another brake pedal the other side of the steering column, which allowed him, or would have allowed him, just to brake with that left foot mid-corner or whatever. And he never got to drive the car because sadly he had the accident at Hockenheim. So that it was that early that drivers, well, Jimmy certainly was thinking about left foot braking. If that is what we're talking about, my gut feel about it is that for those that use the left foot brake, but brake with the left foot perfectly when it's appropriate, it's a very, very good tool. And in my mind, Michael was the first guy that really started to do that to advantage. However, I think the downside to left foot braking is that it's very, very easy to over brake if you've got, say, understeer, and you want to start killing the understeer by giving it a bit more brake, maybe just changing the load, the weight transfer. And it's very difficult for some drivers, and I'm talking midfield Grand Prix drivers now, to distinguish between improving the balance or just making the car slower and slowing the car down too much. And of course that is the effect. Whenever you brake, you are slowing the car down. And that's why in rallying they try to avoid the handbrake as much as possible, even though it's a very good way of getting the car to move. And so it's only the great drivers that have been able, I think, to find that balance between left foot. If you take Ralf Schumacher, who's pretty good, quicker than Montoya when he was on it, and at Williams, say, and quite capable of winning a lot of Grand Prix in the right car. To me, he was a guy, Jarno Trulli was another. They were guys that if they had to start braking with the left foot to balance the car, they would tend to go towards just slowing the car down a bit too much. Whereas a guy like Max would just not be in his nervous system to do that. He'd have so many warning bells going off inside his psyche at the moment that he's actually slowing the car down too much rather than just balancing it. He wouldn't even go near there. He wouldn't be able to. His body just wouldn't let him do it. And so that's the thing about left foot braking. You have to be very careful about it. Of course, all cars today require left foot braking, so it's very easy to overuse it. That's why when I do corner analyses periodically, looking at interesting corners when they appear, and I'll try and do some from Spa this weekend and look at the braking traces. That's why I always make a point of talking about the drivers that have really, really good throttle to brake movement rather than overlap. Overlap, talk to most engineers, is not a great thing, particularly if you're just stopping the car. And Charles is an example of a driver today who I think has incredibly good coordination between the throttle and the brake. And Piastri is very, very good in that area too. And that's why that's very important to see, because that then gives you an insight and I think that is directly related to your ability to feel the difference between balancing the car and slowing down the car. Jenson Button in his era was very good at that as well. I don't think he ever would have been guilty of throttle overlap. He might have been guilty of using too much left foot brake mid-corner just to get the car slowed down a bit more if he wasn't comfortable with it. But in terms of just braking in a straight line, he was just absolutely incredible in terms of his coordination. So yeah, interesting question, very good question. And I haven't yet found an answer. I haven't yet spoken to anybody about whether if you are a left foot kicker of a football, it actually helps you left foot braking in a racing car. It's an interesting point. We had this question about a couple of months ago, and I haven't asked, I still got it in my head to ask somebody that might have some input on that, and I'll continue to do that because it is an interesting point. M.A. Khan, another regular, hello there. Can you compare the 7 times world champions Schumacher-Hamilton style? Do you agree Lewis was probably better at tyre management but has longer corners? Schumacher quicker on raw speed and handling a difficult car, question mark. I think, well, the longer corners that Lewis is using at the moment and has been using basically since Barcelona 22 are not typical of Lewis as a driver prior to Barcelona 22. And I think, so if we take Abu Dhabi 21 as the last sort of demarcation point of Lewis in that. I think up until that point, he and Michael very, very similar in the way they drove. Very similar. I think since then, Lewis, because he's got fewer tools with which to work than Michael had in his era, I think he's talking about electronic things on the car. I think Lewis has changed, and I think because tire management in 2022, 2023 was a completely different art to the Michael era. We're talking two different things. We're talking the Pirelli monopoly. We're talking about these compounds that go off the shelf. This wasn't anything that Michael had to race with. Two different things. So you can't really compare Michael's tire management with Lewis's, if you like, inability to handle tire management post Abu Dhabi 2021. But I do think Lewis was correct probably in the way he tried to adapt his style to get the best from the tires and to give himself a bigger sweet spot within which he could drive the car. And that's not something that he would have done if he was 21 years old, but it was something that he did having won 7 world championships and now driving a very difficult and what felt to him obviously like a very dangerous car, bouncing and all that stuff. Again, Michael never had to deal with that. I think, what he did, he just give himself a bigger platform on which to operate, turned in a bit later, brake more in a straight line, basically tried to get on top of tire temperatures more. And he's still kind of at the back end of that. I think we saw at Silverstone, to my eye, he definitely looked a little bit more like Lewis 2021 at Silverstone. So we'll see at Spa how it goes for him there. But it's difficult to compare in those areas I've just described Michael with Lewis. But I do think that when Lewis was in a Merc, compared with Michael, say, in a Ross Brawn Ferrari, then I think they were very similar in the way they drove. Both short corner drivers and both very, very accurate in everything they did. And both very competitive. Very competitive. I think Michael maybe was a little bit more, I don't think he was more spiky. He was just maybe a little bit more aggressive in the way he used the gears mid-corner and things like that. We kind of take that for granted now, but in Michael's era, he was, I think Nico Rosberg took that to another level in the way he was using gears mid-corner, accelerating up mid-corner with gears. And I think rather than have to, whatever gear you selected for the corner was the gear that you used to be in, was the traditional way of driving. I think Michael was the first guy to realize how much he could play around with the gears as well, with the paddle shift. Something that Ayrton would have loved, of course. So, yeah. Interesting question again. Thank you. Wow, some great questions today from everybody. Thank you very much. M.A. Khan again. So, Peter, is Sterling Moss the godfather of short corners? I've heard you and Mark Hughes talk about his style, but not anyone prior. Did Clark Stewart learn this style from him, or were they naturally short corners? Well, I think as you see today, when you've got it, when quite clearly, if you wanted to study it and look at it, quite clearly, Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen, and a couple of other drivers sort of on the cusp drive very differently from Liam Lawson, Carlos Sainz, Yuki Tsunoda. And yet, Carlos Sainz, Liam Lawson, Yuki Tsunoda never ever try to change the way they drive. I think quite clearly the reality of driving a Formula One car is that everybody does their own thing, and obviously they all find it very difficult to learn from other drivers. And I think that's exacerbated today by the world in which young Formula One drivers live and operate. They are the kings. They come in through the paddock area, they wave to the cameramen, and they've got engineers coming out of their ears. And basically, whenever they're not quick or things aren't going well, there is going to be some sort of engineering solution, in theory, to their problem. Now, that engineering solution might well be looking at the telemetry of the guy in the other car and saying, well, you're braking a bit early here, or you got the power on a bit late there, or whatever. But that is only scratching the surface of what the driver actually needs to do in order to brake a bit later or get the power on a bit sooner. It's not going to happen the way he's actually driving the car, and that's a point that I think the engineers often miss. They don't take into account the way the driver is actually initiating the steering movement, or the way he's coming out of the brake pedal pressure, the very subtle movements that actually are not measured by telemetry. And so if you've got a driver with a fairly wide entry to a corner, let's say Liam Lawson's a good example, and you say to him, well, Isaac's got a much lower minimum speed than you, Liam, so that's great. You don't need to improve there. But what he's doing, he's 30 meters out of the corner, he's going 5 kilometers quicker than you. So you need to be faster out of the corner. You need to get on the power even sooner. That isn't the solution, of course. The solution is to say, if he's slower minimum speed, why is he quicker on exit? He's got the car rotated more logically. But they're not doing that. They just give him that little bit of data, and he has to try and work around it, which is why he never changes really or improves. So going back to your point about Stirling Moss, I never saw Stirling race when he was racing. I was whatever I was, 9 years old when he had his accident at Goodwood. But I did drive with him on the road a few times, and I did watch him in the Audi touring car, the British Touring Car Championship races he did. And yeah, definitely he was superb going into corners, and when we talk about driving and the way he drove on the road, it was always, the entry to the corner, the platform, the getting in early, that was what it was all about. And then I think, from what I've just been saying, I would say for guys like Jim Clark, Jackie Stewart, no, I don't think they looked at the way Stirling drove like that, in that detail. They might have said, I love the way he sits in the car, I like the way he holds the steering wheel, I like the way he, when he's out of the car, I like his body language, or whatever it is. But they wouldn't have looked at those details any more than Jackie Stewart ever asked Jim Clark actually how he drove and why he turned in a bit earlier than he did, or whatever it was in Jackie's mind at the time. They never did, just as they never do now. There's no way Lewis Hamilton, even though it's possibly in his mind, he'd never say to Charles Leclerc, why are you turning in a little bit earlier than me going into Blanchimont, Charles? He wouldn't do it, because Lewis is very protective of what he does, and in his own mind he's got to think that he's the best driver in the world, otherwise he wouldn't be on the grid. In the same way Liam Lawson thinks he's best driver in the world, probably, otherwise he wouldn't get out of bed. And then to the other part of your question, so I can make some observations about Stirling, but only from what I've just said, talking to him, driving with him on the road, and watching him in that touring car. Prior to Stirling, to my mind, if I try to imagine how they were, it's only imagination. I'm sure Alberto Ascari was a short corner driver. You don't see a lot of pictures of Ascari very sideways and throwing the car around. Admittedly, when he was at his peak, winning those championships, it was a very light, small, delicate Formula 2 Ferrari, and it probably didn't lend itself to that too much. But if you compare him with, say, De Portago, he was always much neater to me in the pictures I saw. So I always have him pigeonholed in my mind as, yeah, for sure that guy was a short corner driver. That's Peter Windsor making a few assumptions that probably I shouldn't. Fangio, I think Fangio to me was probably the nearest we're ever going to get to Ayrton Senna. I for some reason, I'm just watching the onboards with him and looking at the way he drove, I don't think he was as short as Ascari, but I think he just was sublime in everything he did, and he was the classic perfect. He was a perfect classic racing driver, just as I think Ayrton Senna was. So for me, put aside obviously their different characters and what they did on the racetrack in terms of trackcraft and overtaking, or just purely going through a quick corner, I don't think there would have been a lot of difference between Fangio and Ayrton Senna in style. So that was that. And I think, before that, it would be wrong to forget about drivers like Rosemeyer, who to me was a sort of Jochen Rindt, which was Ronnie Peterson, which makes him a hero as well. Obviously Nuvolari, who I suspect was up there with Fangio and Senna as a sort of classic perfect racing driver. And Varzi, who I've always seen in my mind as a sort of slightly shorter corner, neater driver as well. But those are kind of imaginations rather. Well, they're based on looking at photographs of them and reading about them. Peter Collins, I think, I put in my mind Peter Collins was very like Lando Norris in the way he drove. Mike Hawthorne was more like Carlos Sainz or Alan Jones. I think Mike Hawthorne, Alan Jones, I suspect that I put those two together. Gilles Villeneuve? No, wasn't a short corner driver at all. And like Fernando was mystified by Lewis's pace at McLaren. Now that's a bad example because Fernando actually does turn in quite early and he's very, very good with his footwork going into the corner. So that's a bad example. I take that one back. I would say more like Leclerc versus Carlos Sainz. You know, it was like that with other drivers. When you're comparing oversteer with understeer, they don't really understand the difference. They can't see it and they're not prepared to accept it. And that's the problem. Then you get weird drivers like Sebastian Vettel, who certainly is by no means a wide entry, long corner driver. But on the other hand, he's not what I would call a classic short corner driver, in that he just manipulates the car perfectly into a rotation point like Max, even when he's got a lot of load on it. Vettel could find a great rotation point, providing he could do most of his braking in a straight line into that point. And it was like a V corner for him. And therefore he didn't have anything like the same feel as Max has, which is why when they took away the downforce in the back of the Red Bull, he suddenly couldn't rotate the car. And that was the difference. And I don't think he ever got on top of that or realized that when he went to Ferrari either. And that was one of the issues there. Amazing questions. Buckinnick. Good day, Peter. Has Max Verstappen been driving to activate the 4th place option out clause in his Red Bull contract? Have you seen any sign of Max intentionally throwing a race? No, I haven't. And I think Max is thinking the car's so bad now I don't need to do anything intentional anyway. I just drive the weekend and there's bound to be some mess that'll cause a problem. And I think he's right. It all started in Spain, didn't it? So, no. I just don't think any more than Max has it in his DNA to use the left foot to slow the car down in order to get around the corner, as distinct from balance the car and not slow it down. I don't think it's in his DNA to do anything other than drive as fast as he can possibly drive that car, given all the variables with which he has to work, i.e. tyre wear, fuel, everything else, and the position he's in the race. No, he's just a racing driver. And very few, and we all know that if you try to drive or play any sport not to win, it's a big problem. And a lot of people were saying this was going to happen to Oliver Solberg in the Rally of Estonia. Going into the last day, it was pretty clear that if he didn't make any mistakes, he was going to win this. And yet, how do you then drive in order not to make mistakes in a rally where you've got trees both sides, and in order to even drive the car, you've got to be sideways? How do you do that? Well, what you do is you just keep enjoying yourself and don't think about it, which is exactly what he did, which is why he won the rally. But the minute you start thinking about, oh no, maybe take it easy here, everything goes wrong. Your timing goes, your rhythm goes. It's all out the window. And so there's no way Max would do that. The only driver I've ever spoken to, I'm sure there have been some, but the only guy I've ever spoken to who actually said he was trying to go slower than he did, was able to go, was Juan Pablo Montoya. And I remember it was at Hungary, and he knew that the Williams wasn't going to be quick enough to be on the pole, so he was trying to qualify 3rd rather than 2nd in order to be on the clean side of the road. Didn't work from memory. But at least he admitted it, Juan Pablo. Speaking of Juan Pablo, his son Seb's doing very well, Sebastian, in Formula 2 now. He's got a decent engine in the car, so he's going really quick, much quicker than his teammate now, Mini. So it really makes you think about F2 and its power units, isn't it? It's just amazing. Give him a new engine, there you go. Anyway, he's doing really well, which is great to see. But I was also very pleased to see that when Solberg won the Rally of Estonia, one of the first guys to congratulate him on Instagram was Sebastian Montoya. You think, wow, there's a guy who's obviously trying to make Formula One. He's got his dad, this and that. And there he is, and he's an Ollie Solberg fan, which kind of bears out what I was saying about how Solberg's result in Estonia has surpassed rallying. It's well over that. I think everybody with any sort of blood in their racing blood in their veins is thinking, wow, that was an achievement with a capital A. Okay, Chris Block says, hey Peter, would you rather be the second driver on a Chapman-Clark team or a Newey Verstappen team? Well, it would have to be Newey Verstappen, wouldn't it? Because the second driver in a Clark-Chapman team, sadly, that was the days when Lotus just didn't have enough bits to produce two identical cars, and even the lead car, the Clark car, was pretty fragile, as Jimmy was beginning to really realise in '67, when he was starting to get the shakes really. And so you never wanted to be in the second Lotus, other than that you had nothing else going on for you, and it was a good way of elevating your name. Having said all of that, I mean, I'm being a bit unkind to Lotus, because the '64 Belgian Grand Prix, have a look at the opening lap. There's a Lotus 25 leading the Grand Prix, and the guy's got an orange helmet as he goes through Eau Rouge, leading the Belgian Grand Prix. Peter Arundel in the second Lotus. Very impressive. So the second Lotus wasn't all bad. And of course, Mike Spence won the '65 Race of Champions. And what else happened with second Lotuses? Trevor Taylor was second in the Dutch Grand Prix, '62. So yeah, you know, I'm being unkind, because there were some good results, some good Lotus results, even in those days. But if you really cared about, you know, your well-being, you would rather be in a Newey car, I think, with a lot of Red Bull money behind you to pay lots of people to make that car fairly rock solid. But you'd get blown away. I mean, if you're asking about, just talking about pace, you know, who's going to overshadow you more, Newey, Verstappen, or Chapman Clark? Well, you know, those you've mentioned there, the two dominant duos in the history of Formula One, really. Chapman Clark, Newey, Verstappen. It's difficult to think of any other. I suppose Brabham, Toranak would be the third that you'd put up there. But they don't come much better than those two partnerships. Sema Dragun says, Hola. Thank you. Trail Break 3 says a sprint weekend around a 4.5 mile wet circuit. Yeah, right. Well, you know what my thoughts are about sprint racing. It's all a waste of time. We should just get on with the normal Grand Prix, and we should have 2 sessions on Friday, qualifying on Saturday, or another session on Saturday morning, qualifying, and then the race. And it's all, you know, nonsensical. Anyway, thank you for your message there, Trail Break. Musa Nguni. Peter, I'm curious, who do you think will win the race this weekend? Also, between the two Aston Martin drivers, if Adrian delivers that rocket ship, who is likely to bring it home? Well, this weekend, what is it? I think it's you know, I'm a bit what's the right word? Confused, probably, by the relative performance from race to race of the various teams. But I would be surprised if Mercedes aren't very quick this weekend, as indeed they were last year. And it looks to me like a George Russell type weekend coming up. But having said that, Ferrari might be there too. Obviously, McLaren are always going to have a very good average, and they may do their normal thing of, well, they'll have to do their thing in reverse, won't they? Well, no, they won't. They'll do the same thing they did at Silverstone, maybe, and not run. They can get away with not running. They can get away with running quite a lot of wing in the dry in qualifying, because the car is so good, and it'll be so quick around Pouhon, Blanchimont, up the top there, that when race day comes, they'll end up with more wing on the car for the wet, and it could well be the same thing. So McLaren, obviously, that'll be their card they'll be playing, but it kind of depends on whether the weather forecasts are that accurate. But if I had to put money down, I suppose I'd go for George, I guess. And the other question about the Aston Martin drivers, we're talking about next year. That's when the Adrian Newey car will appear, really. Well, it will appear. And, well, if it's Fernando versus Lance Stroll, I don't think it'll be much to talk about that. I mean, Fernando will just disappear in this rocket ship, will he not? I mean, Lance Stroll, if it's a good car, Lance Stroll and 10 other drivers will be able to drive it very quickly, or 10 other drivers. But Fernando's still very, very good, and he will love it. The question is, I guess, whether he will keep that drive if, say, Max is on the market, and we don't know yet. I think he'd love to. I think Fernando feels totally ready for it, and he'd love to do it. CACO Demonic. For my 40th birthday, my wife has brought us general admission tickets for Spa. Got any recommendations for good vantage points to enjoy the cars? Well, that's great. congratulations, happy birthday. B, what a birthday present. General admission. That means that there will be a lot of people there, but most of the people will be in the Eau Rouge La Source area. So my advice would be to get away from all of that. And I have done the walk. You walk down on the outside. You can walk from the outside of the approach to La Source all the way down to Stavelot, and it's good. They're fast there. If you can, let me think about how you do that. You want to be, if you can, on the inside of the track, looking at the entry to Pouhon. And you can do that. How can you do that? There must be a bridge. So remember, you've got to get over to the inside of the track, basically, wherever that bridge is, and then walk from Eau Rouge over the hill and over to Pouhon corner, the left-hander, downhill fast left-hander. It's a great corner. You see them coming down the hill out of the tight left, and then they go into Pouhon, and then they're going off towards Stavelot. And I've watched them there, and it's really good, really, really good. So hope you can get there. John hi Peter, always enjoy your videos. Hang on one second, I just got a phone call coming in. So to bring up a potentially sore subject, aside from the abolishment of the proposed cost cap, what do you consider the main reason USF1 failed? It wasn't the abolishment of the cost cap. It was that Ken Anderson and I believed that we could do a team carrying the name USF1 around a car that was designed and built in the United States, in that wonderful racing technology corridor on the East Coast from, say, Charlotte down to Daytona, carbon shops, machine shops, everything else you need. Operate it from Europe, obviously. We were going to operate it, as it happened, from Spain. And Max thought it was just the greatest idea, Max Mosley. And I remember him ringing to congratulate us on the idea. I was in America at the time doing a roadshow to promote the team and raise money for it. And in our mind, because David Richards' attempt to bring a 11th team to the grid had failed, in our mind, we were filling 2 places on the grid that had been empty for a long time. In other words, it was only 20 cars as it is now, and we were another team joining Formula One, an American team. And we wanted to do everything in a logical way. We wanted to build the factory, get all that going. We wanted to design and build the car, get all that going. If possible, test whenever we could, but do quite a lot of, obviously, wind tunnel testing and everything else. And then get it, obviously the crash testing process as well. And then over, say, an 18-month, 2-year period, come to Formula One, start walking before we could trot, and then trotting before we could run, and do everything in a logical way. Instead of which, basically, we agreed to go ahead with the whole thing in March, April 2009. And because Bernie and Max were then having a big fight with the current teams about the Concord Agreement and where that was going to go, they very quickly decided that they would set up a spoof alternative world championship for 2010 for, guess what, teams like the one Peter Windsor and Ken Anderson are doing, and all these and other teams could come and join that as well and be a new world championship. The only problem was all the cars had to be ready and track tested, crash tested by February 2010. So rather than going from a 2.5-year glide path to do the team, we were suddenly having to do everything in 8 months. It was absolutely ridiculous. And when we asked the FIA for dispensation to allow us to have at least 18 months to do the team, they said no. If you don't do that, you'll lose your slot in this new championship we're doing. So I still feel very bad about, obviously bad that the whole thing didn't work, but I feel much more let down by Bernie and Max and the way they controlled Formula One then, and ruined our opportunity to do that team in a logical way, in the way that Haas did it. Obviously Haas had much more time to, from the point where they announced they were going to do it, actually to go racing, and they used Delara to do the car anyway. I hope we're live now. I'm not sure we are, but I'm going to see if I can get this. What's happened is that basically had a complete power failure in the house. Everything went down, and so I'm not sure if we're live now. There's nothing to tell me that it is live. So I think maybe the best thing will be if I kill this live stream and start again. Not going to be easy, I don't think. Okay, somebody's saying I'm back. So I'm, on the basis of that, if I can get a few people now basically to tell me that I'm back, that would be good. I'm just going to go to the bottom. It's very annoying, this, isn't it? It's difficult for me to tell if I'm actually live or not. So if somebody can let me know, that would be good. And now, okay, live is good. All right, I can't see it on the YouTube channel. That's the problem. But anyway, I'm assuming I'm live now. Thank you. What happened was we had all the power just went down, boom, like that. The whole thing, the lights, internet, the whole thing. So there you go. Sorry about all that. Anyway, I think I'd kind of finished talking about what happened with the US F1, which was basically we just had no time to do anything. It was ludicrous. We had to do a new factory, a new car, crash test the car, and do everything in 9 months. So, you know, thank you very much. Right, Kano Light Racer 5. Would you say Seb's more open mindset would help him to adapt his driving style? He also seems genuinely interested in opinions of experts usually, so why not try to make Rob and Seb meet each other? Yeah, I find that, I mean, I've obviously introduced a lot of drivers to Rob over the years. I find that drivers tend to say, yeah, great idea, and then do nothing with it. There's a few young guys in F3 and F2 that's happened with recently, and I get a bit discouraged really, because I think what is wrong? Why they're not following through with this? So, I think if you're talking about Sebastian Montoya, then I can't imagine Juan Pablo would think it was a good thing, because he would be about the last guy in the world that would ever have gone to Rob Wilson, because he thinks, I imagine he still thinks, you drive a race car the way you want to drive a race car, and if you don't have the talent, you don't have the talent, and get on and do it. I would imagine that's how Juan Pablo thinks. So, but I do think Sebastian Montoya has a lot of potential. He's a very nice guy, actually, very nice guy, and very well balanced and very interesting guy as well. As I say, as shown by his interest in Ollie Solberg. Stefan Jakimovic, greetings. Are short corners a way of looking at sports? In other words, a mindset that extends across all sports, or maybe a way of life, philosophy? Well, there's a good question. There is a very good question. And, short corners are not I can get from A to B faster than the next person if I go in a straight line, so therefore I will do the same thing with my business methodology. It's not that. But it does require a certain amount of sensitivity and creativity. In my experience, and I'm talking Nigel Mansell, Carlos Reutemann, two great short corner drivers that I know very, very well. The common characteristic between those two is their simplicity of mind, by which I mean their ability not to confuse the important with the unimportant in terms of driving a racing car, what is important and what isn't, and their immediate assumption of what they are able to do with the car in order to create the positioning and the weight transfer they want with the car. It's not an issue about which they even need to talk to their engineers about. They just know they can do it. And I know that Michael was like that from chatting to his engineers over the years, and I'm sure Max is like that. I'm sure the Red Bull engineers now, when Max says, I just need more front end, I'm sure they've given up saying to him, but if we do that, you might have an unstable rear, Max, because they know that he wouldn't be asking for it unless he knew he could deal with the unstable rear. And it's the same was exactly the same with Carlos and Nigel. And so there's that. And whether that translates then into other things in life, I think it possibly does, in the sense that they tend not to, people who think that way and have that much self-confidence tend not to waste time on things that they believe are irrelevant to the way they live their life. And so, that'll be done. They probably have a very clear thought process in terms of everything they do. In terms of other sports, I mean, certainly in rallying, what we saw it with Ollie Solberg. There's no question that Ollie Solberg was getting more out of the Hankook tyres because he was leaning on them less. And he had to do that anyway in Rally 2, because the car in Rally 2 carries much less downforce, it's much lighter, it's bouncing all over the place. So you've got to be a lot more in line with the Rally 2 car. And so he was doing the same thing with the Rally 1 car and getting a lot more out of the tyres. He was just managing the tyres really well compared with everybody else. And that was a big lesson, I guess, for everybody else. But it's quite difficult to come back from something once you've been doing it for a while and winning rallies with that style, as is the case with the current Rally 1 drivers. So I think it has a direct relationship to rallying. It has a direct relationship to skiing for sure, in terms of not slowing down the path too much, just having the right amount of slide, and then getting to a rotation point, which is the correct one for the straight exit. Definitely skiing. As I said, for Carlos, Ingemar Stenmark was a guy that he actually learned quite a lot from, watching him, and got to meet him a couple of times at Monaco. Tennis, I'm not so sure. To me, tennis is all about balance and weight control and distribution. Football, I don't know enough about football, really. I can't imagine that it's got a lot of parallels with that. And then you got the other sports. So I think those are the ones which have the most direct relationship to what we're talking about. And I'm sorry, I didn't put that question up. That was the question. It was a very good question from Stefan Jakimovic. Cano Light Racer 5. Would you say Lando is criticised too much for being self-critical? As he is self-critical in this situation, he'd develop more, as he is in a different situation than Max and also has a different mindset. I think anybody that criticises Lando for being self-critical has no clue about racing or life, to be honest, because the only way you can improve in life is to be self-critical. You also have to have a lot of auto-suggestion. You need to be very self-disciplined, but you also, in order to maximize that, you've got to be self-critical. And Lando is refreshingly, I think he's more self-deprecating than self-critical, actually. And I think there's a difference between the two, and some people confuse them. I think he is possibly self-deprecating too much. Oh, well, I didn't do that very well, and, Max is so good, or Oscar's this. And there's a difference between that and saying, what Oscar's doing into Pouin is something I've got to learn from. They're two different things. And I think I think he is a bit too self-deprecating. I think he needs to be a little bit more in charge of his side of the garage, and his way of doing things is the right way. But at the same time, he needs to be very self-critical, perhaps even more self-critical than he is, if I think about the way you phrase the question. And Max is self-critical, Lewis is self-critical, Charles is self-critical in terms of their techniques. And I think Isaac Hadjar is too, much more than, say, Liam Lawson is, for example, or Carlos Sainz. So, I think Lando though is capable of doing what Ollie Solberg did, because Ollie is just doing it his way and driving the way he wants to drive the car. And I think Lando has that sort of slightly free-thinking way of operating too. And you don't see him being too restricted by what the engineers want him to do. So that's a very positive side of Lando's character, I think. Trailbreak 3 says, I remember his dad, Peter Solberg. Yeah, well, his dad, Peter Solberg, really quick. Very, very good driver. And indeed, one of the few rally drivers to do days with Rob Wilson and benefit from it. When he was doing a lot of tarmac stages, he came over to Bruntingthorpe and did several days with Rob, and speaks still very fondly of Rob and everything that he learnt from Rob. Sticky Ding Dong, who we started with, is back. Hi there, probably never been away. Unlike me, heard that interlude with the power. Hi Peter, do you have any insight into why Heinz-Harald Frentzen struggled at Williams in 1997? He'd be considerably more relaxed and efficient in the Jordan post-Williams as he was in the Sauber. Do I have any insight as to why that was? I think probably he didn't understand Patrick Head's way of operating, and Patrick probably didn't really understand Heinz-Harald Frentzen's way of operating and how to get the best from him. That wasn't Patrick's thing. It was just like, drive the car, get on with it. Kind of. I'm exaggerating slightly, but I think that's how Frentzen probably saw Patrick. And I think it was more that than anything else. I mean, Frentzen was very good, very, very good. And how short a corner driver was he? How efficient was he? I would put him... I think he was as good as... I was going to say as good as Lando, about like Lando. I'm not sure he was quite as free with the car as Lando is. So I'll take that one back a little bit. But let me think about it. I would say he's at least as quick as Carlos Sainz, if not quicker, on his day. Slightly more efficient, slightly less road being used. So we put him in the Carlos Sainz pace bracket, and it showed that in terms of results. But I just think the environment at Williams at that point was not conducive to a guy like Frentzen, who was fairly withdrawn and fairly, kept things to himself. I just don't think he wasn't particularly confident really in the team. I don't think he felt that, that relaxed, which is an important thing. If you're not relaxed in the team, it does affect you after a while. Kano Light Racer 5 again. Do you think you could learn new things about driving styles after the ground effect era? Especially, what do you think of Max, Charles and Lewis? I know you love to talk about their styles. Well, we talked about styles a lot in this show, haven't we, already? When you mean the ground effect era, you mean this ground effect era, or do you mean the previous ground effect era? I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. But what do I think of Max, Charles and Lewis? I think Lewis, not quite so much today, but certainly up until 21, was right up there with Max and Charles as one of the great short corner drivers in the history of Formula One, as is Charles, as is Max. And I think in any era, in any type of car, they would be quick. Assuming the car isn't a Mercedes post-22, which was a bouncing bomb of a car that's proved very difficult. Well, it was a big shock for Lewis, really, after everything he'd been driven, I suppose. He just never really got his head around it. I don't think George did either. It's just that he didn't have much to relate it to. So it was more a case of just get on with it and do it. And, Lewis, because he'd been driving so many good cars for so long, it was much more of a culture shock for him. Cano Light Race says, always love to see Petter and Oliver at Race of Champions. Great drivers. They are. They're very, very good. Mouse Down. Most regular road cars nowadays are so ugly compared to those beautiful Porsches Peter showed. Well, that Porsche Carrera 6 was beautiful. Yeah, thank you for that, Mouse Down. I was chatting to Jack about this. Why is it? I mean, I don't know if it's my imagination or what, but when you look at sort of mass manufacturers like Renault, or I don't know, let's not put Toyota in there, but we'll say Renault and a couple of others these days, when they do their full electric cars, they're actually slightly nicer styled than the ICE cars, the internal combustion engine cars, in terms of usually the front, the rear, the lining, maybe the interiors, the lines. Why is that? Do they just think, oh, well, this is electric cars are so boring, we've got to make them look really nice? Is that what's going on? Or is it that, I don't know what it is. Is it that they've actually got less that they have to design around because there's not a big engine there and therefore they can do more with the line of the front and this and that? Or is it that the batteries that they carry are easier things to design around than engines? I don't know. It's just weird, isn't it? You see a nice looking, I don't know, whatever it is, Kia, and you think, oh, that's quite a nice looking car. And it turns out, oh, that's electric. Oh, okay. But why is there so much emphasis on design with electric cars? It's good to see, but it just shows what we've been missing from all the internal combustion engine designers for the last 10 years or more. Cano Light Racer 5. Do you watch the Race of Champions? By which you mean, I think, the current Race of Champions, not the Race of Champions as it used to be at Brands Hatch, correct? So I've been to many good Race of Champions at Brands Hatch, that's for sure. But I think you mean the current one. I haven't actually seen any recently. I went to a couple, covered them for TV and so forth, and I was there when Heikki Kovalainen won it. Yeah, I love it, actually. I'll try and get to it. We'll certainly watch it, this coming one. Cano Light Race 5. There you go. Proving my point. Mouse down says it's timeless. Even the electric ones like the Taycan are looking great. Yeah. I suppose they're saying, you know, we're Porsche. So sorry we've got to do an electric car, but at least we'll make it look nice. Is it that? At least Porsche have got quite a lot of normally aspirated engines around there still, haven't they? Is it 2? I just joined, but did you talk about Max? I don't think you missed too much, mate, because we spent about 10 minutes trying to get the feed going. Well, I did anyway, not knowing if we'd lost the feed or not when the whole caboose went down. The power cut here. Anyway, there we go. Big Al Nowitz says, I can't wait for Spa. Good. Hi, Peter. Do you know whatever happened to the Times reporter Keith Botsford, whom was once on the excellent document Toys for the Boys? It's a very good question. I was thinking about Keith not so long ago. I hope he's still with us. Absolutely brilliant writer. Use of the English language was as good as anyone that I've come across. Very, very good writer. Had his own way of understanding Formula One. Came in the mid-70s. At a time when James Hunt was on the rise, and immediately started referring to him as Master James in everything he wrote for the Sunday Times, which I always thought was a little bit odd, and he had a few other bits and bobs that were a bit odd, but in general, wonderful turn of phrase. And I learnt a lot from Keith about life and about writing and other authors and who to study. Paul Theroux is an example of a writer that whose works I've only been reading because of Keith Botsford. And another was Saul Bellow, actually. I'd never even heard of Saul Bellow until Keith Botsford recommended him to me. Humboldt's Gift, I remember him saying, you've got to read Humboldt's Gift. And I used to talk to him a lot about Tom Wolfe and the style of writing that Tom used in sort of free prose thought writing, which the new journalism, as it used to be called. We used to talk a lot about that. And I visited him once in South Kensington in London, just to go and chat with him, have dinner. And I went up to his house, and he was wearing his apartment, and it was a fairly small apartment. He was wearing a sort of smock thing, like a sort of Aztec smock from Peru, and he was cooking a big saucepan of stew on the thing. It turned me off a little bit, I've got to say. He was bohemian, I think is what I'm really getting around to saying, very bohemian. And yeah, I used to have a lot of fun with Keith Botsford. He put me in my place, that is for sure. And I felt like a very poor writer whenever I was anywhere near Keith Botsford. I don't know what happened to him, and I just hope he's well and doing well today, but I just don't know. I think we just had a nice super chat come up. Let me just have a look at that one. Here's one. So this is from Cameron. Fries with mayonnaise. How could one be so cruel, Peter? Well, believe me, it's almost impossible not to have the mayonnaise with the fries at Spa. It is the thing, especially at the Master King. It just, I can't imagine anybody has ever had fries without mayonnaise at Spa. And once you've got used to it, it's actually very difficult not to do it every time. And it's also the size of the fry as well. It used to be quite a thick, juicy fry. It can't be sort of McDonald's things. Mousedown says, honestly, I think the McLarens are this good on merit, and with the Merc engine in there, I expect them to remain the dominant team under the next regs. Well, yeah, there you go. So there's somebody already thinking in 26 with the fully electrified engines, power units, that McLaren will still be there. Difficult to see them going off the boil, isn't it? I agree with you. But you would imagine the Mercedes factory team by now should be able to at least be as good as their customer operations, if not better. And so we'll see what happens in 26. But going into Spa, I think with the changeable weather, and if it is dry in qualifying and it's wet on Sunday, the one team that will do a very good adaptation for that will be McLaren, as we saw at Silverstone. Mosley, R.I.P. Mosley, yeah, well, he did a lot for Motorsport. He's not with us anymore, that's for sure. So, Trail Break 3, according to what I read, they want to keep the classic circuits as historical as possible. What's that mean? Not use them. let them have lots of undergrowth and weeds everywhere and nobody using them. Yeah. Dillstar22 says the F1 movie is absolute rubbish. Well, it's not what I've been reading in email from the FIA. Came in yesterday, or was it Liberty? One of the two, I can't remember. And they were saying that unbelievable spurt in popularity of Formula One, entirely due to the F1 movie. So there you go. So Trailbreak 3 says, I love Brands Hatch. Yep, there you go. So we need to bring circuits like Brands back into the calendar by having them built in proper places. What do you think of Assen instead of Zandvoort? Maybe wrong. Isn't Assen where Mick Doohan had his big shunt? I may be wrong there. Something like, somewhere where we never race Formula One. I know that. Anyway, I'd love to see Jack Doohan back in that car. When's that going to happen? Come on, Flav. What do you think of Assen instead of... I love Zandvoort. I think rather than accommodate the Formula One paddock area, I think the Formula One paddock should accommodate circuits like Zandvoort, and everybody has to bring Winnebagos rather than huge big motorhomes and fit into the paddock, because Zandvoort's such a great traditional circuit. It's no good saying the circuit's too small for the cars and the industry. We've got to fit the circuits. Punctured ball, put in a working plan, go for it, Peter, you're the man to do it. I think this is to build the Nürburgring in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Well, there you go. So here we go. Review. Would you say Hamilton is the late breaker? Does he break the latest? And would you say that this is recommended? Can you expand how his style changed after 21 and how much impact it has? No, I would say Lewis has never been a late breaker. He's always been a very, very efficient breaker. And sometimes that's resulted in him being able to brake later than his teammates, for example, in which case they may say, well, he's a late breaker. But he's only braking late because he has incredible feel for the brake pedal pressure, and when to apply it after the initial pressure, and how to feel the right point on the road and which to be really solid on the brakes. And this showed through against Kovalainen and many other teammates at McLaren. He doesn't set out to be a late breaker. He sets out to brake as late as he needs to brake in order to have exactly the rotation he wants mid-corner and to lead into that rotation point with a short corner. So that's how he does it. And again, also to repeat the point, if you are a shorter corner driver and you're extending the straight a little bit before you're starting to really slow the car down, let's say you're just feathering the throttle slightly and then you're slowing the car down, it will look as if you're braking very late because you've actually extended the straight. But in terms of what he's doing in his own bubble, he's not actually braking late to the point where he's got any sort of instability or locking up or anything like that. Of course, he has lockups like everybody, but that's more a tire temperature thing than anything else. So that was that. But I think the other part of your question, what happened after 21, I think after 21, he found he just didn't have a front end around which he could drive and have this sensitivity and this feel to lead up to a rotation point. And on top of that, he had lots of bouncing on the straight and going into the corner. So he just felt all over the place in terms of being in the cockpit and then not having any feel for what the car was doing. And all he did from that point on was just focus more on just braking in a straight line and obviously trying to brake as late as possible within the realms of not destabilizing the car any more than he needed to and relying still on his very good brake pedal pressure feel, and then turn in a little bit wider, just trying to make sure, well, we got all that weight transfer done. Now we'll set some more weight transfer into the car, some more load into the car, and we'll try and separate them so that we don't overload everything the car is doing, and we'll try and break it down. And that's what he's still doing. I think, as I said, I think at the British Grand Prix, there were signs that he was starting to get back on top of how he used to drive again. But again, we'll see in the upcoming races. I think Hungary will be a real litmus test for Lewis in terms of how he's driving now. But that's what he did post-21 when the Mercedes was so bad. And once he got into that, I think because of all the road dust he's got on him as a driver anyway, he became quite reluctant, to put it kindly, to want to get away from that, because at least that was allowing him to sort of finish races and occasionally win the odd race or two and be there and get some results. Whereas before that, using his normal technique, the car was just all over the place for him and he couldn't drive it. That's what I see it. Trail Break 3. What are your thoughts, Peter, on the return of the flat four for 26? Well, what we're saying is not having the ground effect, and I don't know, until we see it. I don't think we've got enough detail yet of what it's going to be like. Obviously, a big question is how much turbulence and backwash there'll be from the car in front and what that will do to the front of your car. Maybe it's better, maybe it's not. To me, it's all about the size and the weight of the cars these days as much as anything else, and I think they're going to be even heavier. And from what I understand at the moment, they're going to be just as big, if not bigger. They are looking to go to smaller cars for, I don't know, 28 or something. But I don't have any more thoughts than that, really, other than that there are quite a lot of things that they need to be changing, in my opinion, in order for them to become really efficient, nice Grand Prix cars again. Ashish Jain, do you think short corners apply to other motorsports? I noticed in MotoGP the 8-time world champion Marc Marquez corners being noticeably shorter, especially the left-handers. Yeah, I mean, I didn't mention MotoGP when I was answering this question earlier because I don't really know enough about it, other than that if you're over 45 degrees angle, well, 45 degrees is 1G, isn't it? So I'm always thinking 1G, not a lot, but I know how much skill is involved. And if you've noticed that, then obviously we need to add MotoGP to our list of corners where you can just get in early and get the bike rotated. My mind boggles at the thought of how you would actually do that and how much talent these guys have. I don't even want to go there really because it's so impressive what they do in terms of the pictures. So amazing. We've got a live chat here. I don't see how to bring it up here, but I'm sorry, a super chat. It says it's from Octay Yilmaz. Thank you very much for that, by the way. Hi, Peter. Considering Max has 65 wins and 44 poles, 34 fastest laps, and 117 podiums, where do you think he will be finished at rankings? Oh, he'll be blowing everybody away. Only because he'll be racing for longer, with more races per season than anyone before him, and in a safer era, touch wood. So, yeah, of course, you can't really relate those numbers to, I don't know, one Manuel Fangio, who raced in some years when there were like 4 or 5 rounds of the World Championship, and in any given Formula One year, I don't know, 3, 4 Formula One drivers would be killed. How can you relate Fangio's era with a different point scoring system to Max's era? You can't. So the numbers are just numbers. They're impressive when you read them out like that, mate. Unbelievable. Just feel like, going out and having a shower, don't you? It's just too much. But, yeah, you can't compare them. And he will go on because, as I say, it will be, in theory, it'll get safer and there'll be more races probably. And he'll go on and have even more. Trail Break 3. Lewis never ran another driver into the wall. Different drivers, in my opinion. Yeah, oh yeah, and that we're not talking about how they were on track. I think it's Michael versus Lewis. Nothing to do with their TrackCraft. Obviously, that was not the question. But if you wanted to have that question, yeah, Lewis, much cleaner driver than Michael Schumacher, no doubt. Trailbreak says he misses Mr. Braun. Yeah, I'm sure. Well, we all miss Ross, who's hopefully at this moment fishing and having fun. Trailbreak 3 says that Michael was never the same when he returned to Formula One from racing bikes. Well, isn't that because he had a massive shunt on one? I think it was that. Wilf's Wanderings. Hi, Peter. Hope you're keeping well. A random thought on Jim Clark, please. Random thought on Jim Clark. Well, he liked ice cream. I've got several photographs of Jimmy going back to Riverside 65 Can-Am race, eating an ice cream, to Monza 67, eating an Italian gelato in a cone, cornetto, just one cornetto, and in between a couple of others. So yeah, I think Jimmy quite liked his ice cream, especially when it was a hot day. There you go, as a random thought. And he was still super fit and super quick. Volts. Did you ever see Oscar beat Lando go-karting on Lando's channel? Do you think this is the same weight as the Yuki Lawson dirt truck challenge? Oh, okay. No, I haven't seen that. And it's good old, if it is true, well, I'm sure it is if you're saying it, good on Lando for putting it up there. It's his channel. Why would he put it up there? But anyway, his channel. Depends what sort of comparison it was and how serious they were, I guess. So I haven't seen it, so I can't really judge. But in terms of the Yuki Liam thing, it was, even though it was a promotion for Red Bull, it was actually reasonably well done, wasn't it? You know, they had the 2 regular drivers coaching them, and they had enough time, and they had the stopwatch, and everything was equal. And so, you know, it wasn't much argument at the end of it. One was quicker than the other. The karting, you never really know what was going on there. But, and I think with karting also, you need to, I don't know how much difference there would have been in weight. It's so important, weight in karting, isn't it? And were they the same weight karts, all the rest of it? Probably, knowing Lando, but anyway. No, it's a good point. Haven't seen it. And if he did, oh, there you go. Maybe that's something Lando should be looking at. So I can't understand that question at all. Max Woe says, hi Peter, what would you say about the difference in driving styles between Moss, Clark, Stewart, based on Rob Wilson's short corner philosophy? How have you things developed since? Well, as I said earlier, I think we've kind of answered Clark and Moss, very, very similar. For me, Jackie was slightly less of a short corner driver than Jim Clark, slightly less, but not much. And I suspect that's possibly because he drove more difficult Formula One cars than Jimmy. If you think about, I mean, the 65 BRM was a beautiful car, but the 66 and 67 H16 was a dog of a car. And Jackie would have been a bit like Lewis in 22, a bit shocked at that car. Still drove it very well, but had to sort of enlarge his sweet spot just to get the thing over the line. 68, yeah, the Matra's 68, 69, the Matra was brilliant. 70, March 701 was not a great car, and nor was the 72 Tyrrell. The 73 Tyrrell, quite short wheelbase. I remember Emerson Fittipaldi saying after the 73 Brazilian Grand Prix, when I think Jackie finished second, he said that was as good a drive as you're ever going to see from anybody. That, with a short wheelbase Tyrrell, dirty as it was, over the bumps of Interlagos, for Jackie to finish second was just an amazing drive. So I think Jackie had a slightly bigger sweet spot than Jimmy. But having said that, Jimmy was so adaptable from car to car, whether it be Formula 2 car, touring car, sports car, Lotus 40, Lotus 30, Volstead USAC car, leading at Riverside or running second. You know, Jimmy had it. So I would just say Jackie was slightly less short than Jim. But and as how have things developed since? I don't think much has changed in terms of that philosophy. It's just that, if anything, I think the modern or the current technology and data acquisition has removed even more the ability of young drivers to be able to see the benefits of short corners, because they're looking at so many other numbers, most of which are not important, that they're covering any shortcomings they've got with an engineering, numerical, digital solution that actually doesn't get to the heart of the problem, as we see, as drivers continuing to make the same mistakes race in, race out. And so I think that's part of the modern era, that the Rob Wilson philosophy is still there, going strong, 100%. Right, I'm just going back to another one. Where are we? Jeffrey B. Hi Peter, thanks for all your insights. Sainz has been in the media recently complaining about his Ferrari exit and why Red Bull didn't take him. Is this a calculated move or just emotions boiling over? Well, I don't know. I mean, I've been saying that all last year, that it was completely wrong for Ferrari to sack Carlos Sainz, the job he was doing, and he was the perfect number 2 to Charles Leclerc. I've been saying that all year. Carlos never seemed to say anything, I guess because he just wanted to keep the stability in the team till the end of the year. And then, against certainly my thoughts, not that I'm important in terms of that, but I imagine that he would go to Sauber because it was the team with the most potential. There was a nice brand there around which he could work, and the team could get no worse than they were, so therefore he could only grow with them, and there were good people there, Binotto, Jonathan Wheatley and so forth. But he went to Williams, which was always going to be a rat race, having Alex Albon in the other car, because Albon is so good. He's very good. And Williams are a bit of a faceless team, only be as good as they are. So if he's now starting to realise that, it's a bit late, isn't it? And if it's a calculated move, what's it calculated for? I mean, I was quite close to him over the winter, saying I can't believe now that Perez is gone that they won't take him to Red Bull. And the answer was there's no way he's ever going to go to Red Bull, and we all know the reasons. So I'm assuming it's Max saying he didn't want Carlos in the other car. So I don't think anything would have changed now. Apart from if Max leaves Red Bull, then obviously I would say Carlos would be a guy they should be looking at. I hope they do. And I hope he does end up in a Red Bull, because he'd go very well there. But he doesn't need to be saying anything. Everybody knows that. And he made the mistake in the first place, I think, in going to Williams. Because look, I mean, the Sauber's not looking bad, is it? And when you think about that whole future with Audi, it's looking even better. Max Woe, non-related Formula One question. What cars have you had in the past, and what's your favourite? I imagine you're a Lotus man, Peter. Well, I was talking to Jack about this the other day. I was working in journalism in an era, incredibly lucky era, when at Autocar, and competition car for that matter, when we had a new road test car every year, a long-term car. And they're always brand new cars from the manufacturers. So I had some great cars in my time with Autocar, from Alfa Giulietta, Spitfire Mark IV, Fiat X19, Toyota Celica, and then the best car I had in that entire, I had a Escort twin Weber carburetor Escort Mark II at one point, as a sort of road test car, a long-term car. And then I had a 131 Sport Fiat orange with black wheels, which was my favorite car of all the ones I had in that period. Loved that car. And that's the car that in a wet Brands Hatch one day I was with Carlos, and he did a few laps with me in that car and just loved it as well, the road car. So they were all those. In the middle of all that, or before all that actually, I bought, when I first came over from Australia, all my childhood, all I ever wanted was an Elan, a Lotus Elan. And when I came to England, I obviously wanted to buy an Elan. And I bought one in 1974 when I got my first real job at Competition Car Magazine. From the back of Classic Car Magazine, there was a red Elan S3 coupe. And I thought I'd better have a coupe because it's England and it's going to be very wet and cold. And so I bought that for £750, and I've still got it. And it's perfect condition. I run it whenever I go to the UK now. I'm going to try and bring it over to Spain. It's a beautiful car. And I found out after I'd bought it that the original owner was Ian Scott Watson, Jim Clark's manager. Pure chance, pure luck. And so I wrote to him, and he said, yeah, I definitely owned that car. I built it up in early 65, brought it up as in kit form. It was built by the Jock McBain Garage mechanics who prepared the Border Reivers cars. And he ran it for a couple of years. And said whenever Jim Clark came up, back after 65 and 66, he always borrowed that car and drove that car. So that's a Jim Clark car in a way. I've still got it. And I've got that car. I've also got Jimmy's yellow 1967 Elan that he drove throughout Europe in 67, left-hand drive Elan, which I love. I've had a Lotus Super 7, 66 Super 7. I've got a Mark 1 66 Lotus Cortina. And here I've got a Hyundai i20N. I've got a Cupra station wagon thing, sport thing, which is good for long trips, nice car. I've got a little Toyota Igo Cross we use just for shopping and doing what we need to do in Spain. And I've got a Rally 2 Skoda Fabia, limited edition, only 100 made of them for the road, which has got a 190 horsepower ABT power adaptation on it, which is a very cool car as well. Bright green with bits on it, accents. Yeah, so that's a good car, handles beautifully, as does the i20N. So very lucky, yeah, got lots of nice cars, and never really know from one day to the next what to drive, but yeah, some great roads in Spain, love it here. Always obey the speed limit, of course. Trailbreak 3 says, recommendation for Spa, bring an umbrella. Max Woe. Peter, one more question. Could you do a video with Rob Wilson actually explaining what short corners are? So I think a lot of people are confused about what you mean exactly. I've seen others ask the same thing. Yeah, I can do. I've done quite a lot with Rob. If you look at my channel, he does explain a lot of that in that, and I've done videos as well explaining it. I'm not sure I can explain it any more than I have, except that on some days my brain is perhaps working a little bit better than others, and so I could do that. So yeah, it's getting to be that time when I think we've almost had enough. I feel quite lucky that we've survived this live stream without any more power failures, if that's the I'm just having a look at some of these other questions that are coming up on here. Let me have a look. So there's a question here. I don't think this is from 413 Tomako Road. I don't think Science wanted to drive for the same company as his father, so nobody would say anything about it. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I think he would have. I just think he thought the Renault, the Sauber was a slow car and he couldn't bear driving around the back of the field, and Williams was going to be at least midfield, if not higher. I think that's what he felt. Trailbreak 3 says Renault 5 Turbo. I never had a Renault 5 Turbo, but I did have, I forgot to mention it was at Williams. I had a Williams Clio 16 valve, and I had a Laguna 16 valve at Williams. I also had a 500 SL Merc at a time when you could buy Mercs relatively cheaply from the factory if you're in Formula One, which I did. I went over there and drove it back from Stuttgart, which was nice. At the same time, Adrian bought one too, and we brought the two over. That was good fun. So those Mercs were nice. Probably lots of other cars I've completely forgotten about, but anyway, there you go. I had a BMW, that's about 318i in the Autocar days. I loved that car too. Beautiful car. Jake says, Peter, do some video on your road cars, your garage. I need to do a video on my studio here. I've got lots of stuff like this Carlos Reutemann engine piston, for example, or the Carlos Reutemann Fiat 131. I'm just holding it up because I love that car. I love looking at it. I've just bought a model of Jim Clark's Levin winning 1965 Lotus 32B Climax, the first Jim Clark car I ever saw at Warwick Farm in 65, but this is it's got the SO logo on it, so it's as he won with that car at Levin in New Zealand. So that was nice, got that. So anyway, there we go. See if there's any more coming up here. I don't think so. It seems to have jammed now, this chat thing, and I'm looking at the chat. There's a lot more questions on the YouTube channel, but I can't get to them really, so there you go. Anyway, it's 1:30 and I'm getting a bit thirsty, so there you go. What are we doing this afternoon? We're doing, I'll tell you what, I'm just going to get this car here. This car is, it wasn't red when I drove it, but this car is, I bought this recently, is the Fiat 850 Coupe, and it was the first car that I ever drove, really. That's what I learnt to drive with and passed my Mike's. This is the car that I drove in Australia, passed my license with on my 17th birthday. My mum had one of these. It was dark blue, ours, with tan upholstery. And I just think, what a lovely little car. They don't make them like that anymore, do they? Rear-engined, of course, but just beautiful. Fiat certainly don't make them like that anymore. I don't know what's happened to Fiat. I know they've got the 500, and that's quite cool, but the rest of the range? I never really went for the 124 Abarth thing. Never really. For those of us that actually drove the Fiat 124, and my dad had a 124 Coupe, to match the blue 850 Coupe we had, it wasn't even the same car. Completely different car, not even in the same category. So there we are. Sorry about all the glitches today. And one day we'll do a glitch-free live stream. But this time the electrics went down, the power went down, but we're still here, still going, just. And I'd like to thank everybody for their questions and comments. And a big thanks too to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to TrackNinja, and of course to REC Watches for their support of our channel. Without those companies, the channel wouldn't be what it is. Well, the channel probably wouldn't exist at all. So big thanks to them as well. So we'll be back with our usual videos over the weekend from Spa, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. We'll see what happens there. If you're going to Spa, as I say, take an umbrella, but equally enjoy yourself. Some great corners there. And take care. See you soon.